Wake Robin, the return of the birds. Spring in our northern climate may fairly be said to extend from the middle of March to the middle of June. At least the vernal tide continues to rise until the latter date, and it is not till after the summer solstice that the shoots and twigs begin to harden and turn to wood, or the grass to lose any of its freshness and succulency. It is this period that marks the return of the birds. One or two of the more hardy or half-domesticated species, like the song sparrow and the bluebird, usually arriving in March, while the rarer and more brilliant woodbirds bring up the procession in June. But each stage of the advancing season gives prominence to certain species as to certain flowers. The dandelion tells me when to look for the swallow, the dog-tooth violet when to expect the wood thrush, and when I have found the wake robin in bloom, I know the season is fairly inaugurated. With me this flower is associated not merely with the awakening of Robin, for he has been awake for some weeks, but with the universal awakening and rehabilitation of nature. Yet the coming and going of the birds is more or less a mystery and a surprise. We go out in the morning and no thrush or vireo is to be heard. We go out again and every tree and grove is musical, and every grove is musical. Yet again all is silent. Who saw them come? Who saw them depart? This pert little winter wren, for instance, darting in and out of the fence, driving under the rubbish here and coming up yards away, how does he manage with those little circular wings to compass degrees and zones and arrive always in the nick of time? Last August I saw him in the remotest wilds of the Adirondacks, impatient and inquisitive as usual. A few weeks later, on the Potomac, I was greeted by the same hardy little busybody. Does he travel by easy stages from bush to bush and from wood to wood? Or has the compact little body force and courage to brave the night and the upper air, and so achieve leagues at one pull? And yonder bluebird, with the earth tinge of his breast and the sky tinge on his back, did he come down out of heaven on that bright March morning when he told us softly and plaintively that if we pleased, spring had come? Indeed, there is nothing in the return of the birds more curious and suggestive than in the first appearance of rumors of the appearance of this little bluecoat. The bird at first seems a mere wandering voice in the air. One hears it call or carol on some bright March morning, but it is uncertain of its source or direction. It falls like a drop of rain when no cloud is visible. One looks and listens, but to no purpose. The weather changes, perhaps a cold snap with snow comes on, and it may be a week before I hear the note again. And this time, or the next perchance, see the bird sitting on the stake in the fence, lifting his wing as he calls cheerily to his mate. Its notes now become daily more frequent. The birds multiply, and flitting from point to point, call and warble more confidently and gleefully. Their boldness increases till one sees them hovering with a saucy, inquiring air about barns and outbuildings, peeping into dovecotes and stable windows, inspecting knotholes and pump trees, intent only on a place to rest. They wage war against robins and wrens, pick quarrels with swallows, and seem to deliberate for days over the policy of taking forcible possession of one of the mud houses of the latter. But as the season advances, they drift more into the background, schemes of conquest which they at first seemed bent upon abandoned, and they settle down very quietly in their old quarters in remote stumpy fields. Not long after the bluebird comes the robin, sometimes in March, but in most of the northern states, April is the month of the robin. In large numbers they scour the fields and groves. You hear their piping in the meadow and the pasture on the hillside. Walk in the woods and the dry leaves rustle with the whir of their wings. The age is vocal with their cheery call. In excessive joy and vivacity they run, leap, scream, chase each other through the air, diving and sweeping among the trees with perilous rapidity. In that free, fascinating half-work and half-play pursuit, sugar-making, a pursuit which still lingers in many parts of New York as in New England, the robin is one's constant companion. When the day is sunny and the ground bare, you meet him at all points and hear him at all hours. At sunset on the tops of the tall maples, with look heavenward, and in a spirit of utter abandonment, he carols his simple strain. And sitting thus amid the stark, silent trees above the wet, cold earth, with the chill of winter still in the air, there is no fitter or sweeter songster in the whole year round. It is in keeping with the scene and the occasion. How round and genuine the notes are, and how eagerly our ears drink them in. The first utterance in the spell of winter is thoroughly broken, and the remembrance of it afar off. Robin is one of the most native and democratic of our birds. He is one of the family, and seems much nearer to us than those rare exotic visitants as the orchard starling or rose-breasted grosbeak, with their distant high-bred ways. Hardy, noisy, frolicsome, neighborly, and domestic in his habits, strong of wind and bold in spirit, he is the pioneer of the thrush family, and well worthy of the finer artists whose coming he heralds and in a measure prepares us for. I could wish Robin less native and plebeian in one respect, the building of his nest. Its coarse material and rough masonry are creditable neither to his skill as a workman nor to his taste as an artist. I am the more forcibly reminded of his deficiency in this respect from observing yonder hummingbird's nest, which is a marvel of fitness and adaptation, a proper setting for this winged gem. The body of it composed of a white, felt-like substance, probably the down of some plant or the wool of some worm, and toned down in keeping with the branch on which it sits by minute tree lichens woven together by threads as fine and frail as gossamer. From Robin's good looks and musical turn we might reasonably predict a domicile of equal fitness and elegance. At least I demand of him as clean and handsome a nest as the kingbirds, whose harsh jingle, compared with Robin's evening melody, is as the clatter of pots and kettle beside the tone of a flute. I love his note and ways better even than those of the orchard starling or the Baltimore oriole, yet his nest, compared with theirs, is a half-subterranean hut contrasted with a Roman villa. There is something courtly and poetical in a pensile nest. Next to a castle in the air is a dwelling suspended to the slender branch of a tall tree, swayed and rocked forever by the wind. Why need wings be afraid of falling? Why build only where boys can climb? After all, we must set it down to the account of Robin's democratic turn. He is no aristocrat, but one of the people, and therefore we should expect stability in his workmanship rather than elegance. Another April bird, which makes her appearance sometimes earlier and sometimes later than the robin, and whose memory I fondly cherish, is the phoebe bird, the pioneer of the flycatchers. In the inland farming districts, I used to notice her on some bright morning about Easter Day, proclaiming her arrival with much variety of motion and attitude from the peak of the barn or hay shed. As yet you may have heard only the plaintive, homesick note of the bluebird or the faint trill of the song sparrow, and Phoebe's clear, vivacious assurance of her veritable bodily presence among us again is welcomed by all ears. At agreeable intervals in her lay, she describes a circle or an ellipse in the air, ostensibly prospecting for insects, but really, I suspect, as an artistic flourish, thrown in to make up in some way for the deficiency of her musical performance. If plainness of dress indicates powers of song, as it usually does, then Phoebe ought to be unrivaled in musical ability, for surely that ashen-gray suit is the superlative of plainness, and that form likewise would hardly pass for a perfect figure of a bird. The seasonableness of her coming, however, and her civil, neighborly ways shall make up for all her deficiencies in song and plumage. After a few weeks Phoebe is seldom seen except as she darts from her moss-covered nest beneath some bridge or shelving cliff. Another April comer, who arrives shortly after Robin Redbreast, with whom he associates both at this season and in the autumn, is the gold-winged woodpecker, alias High-Hole, alias Flicker, alias Yarrup. He is an old favorite of my boyhood, and his note to me means very much. He announces his arrival by a long, loud call repeated from the dry branch of some tree or a stake in the fence, a thoroughly melodious April sound. I think how Solomon finished that beautiful description of spring, and the voice of the turtle is heard in the land, and see that a description of the spring in the farming country to be equally characteristic should culminate in like manner, and the call of the high-hole comes up from the wood. It is a loud, strong, sonorous call, and does not seem to imply an answer, but rather to subserve some purpose of love or music. It is a Yarrup's proclamation of peace and goodwill to all. On looking at the matter closely, I perceive that most birds not denominated songsters have in the spring some note of sound or call that hints of a song, and answers imperfectly the end of beauty and art. As a livelier iris changes on the burnished dove, and the fancy of the young man turns lightly to thoughts of his pretty cousin, so the same renewing spirit touches the silent singers, and they are no longer dumb. Faintly they lisp the first syllables of the marvelous tale. Witness the clear, sweet whistle of the gray-crested titmouse, the soft nasal piping of the nuthatch, the amorous, vivacious warble of the bluebird, the long, rich note of the meadowlark, the whistle of the quail, the drumming of the partridge, the animation and loquacity of the swallows, and the like. Even the hen has a homely, contented carol, and I credit the owls with a desire to fill the night with music. All birds are incipient or would-be songsters in the spring. I find corroborative evidence of this even in the crowing of the cock. The flowering of the maple is not so obvious as that of the magnolia. Nevertheless, there is effectual inflorescence. Few writers award any song to that familiar little sparrow, the socialist, yet who that has observed him sitting by the wayside and repeating with devout attitude that fine sliding chant does not recognize the neglect? Who has heard the songbird sing? Yet he has a lisping warble, very savory to the ear. I have heard him indulge in it even in February. Even the cow bunting feels the musical tendency and aspires to its expression with the rest, perched upon the topmost branch beside his mate or mates, for he is quite a polygamist, and usually has 2 or 3 demure little ladies in faded black beside him. Generally, in the early part of the day, he seems literally to vomit up his notes. Apparently with much labor and effort they gurgle and blubber out of him, falling on the ear with a peculiar subtle ring, as of turning water from a glass bottle, and not without a certain pleasing cadence. Neither is the common woodpecker entirely insensible to the wooing of the spring, and like the partridge, testifies his appreciation of melody after quite a primitive fashion. Passing through the woods on some clear, still morning in March, while the metallic ring and tension of winter are still in the earth and air, the silence is suddenly broken by long, resonant hammering upon a dry limb or stub. It is a downy beating to a reveille to spring. The utter stillness in the utter stillness and amid the rigid forms we listen with pleasure, and as it comes to my ear oftener at this season than at any other, I freely exonerate the author of it from the imputation of any gastronomic motives, with credit and credit him with a genuine musical performance. It is to be expected, therefore, that the yellowhammer will respond to the general tendency and contribute his part to the spring chorus. His April call is the finest touch, his most musical expression. I recall an ancient maple standing sentry to a large sugar bush that year after year afforded protection to a brood of yellow hammers in its decayed heart. A week or two before the nesting seemed actually to have begun, 3 or 4 of these birds might be seen on almost any bright morning, gambolling and courting amid its decayed branches. Sometimes you would hear only a gentle persuasive cooing or a quiet confidential chattering. Then that long loud call taken up by the first one, then another, as they sat upon the naked limbs, anon sort of wild, rollicking laughter, intermingled with various cries, yelps, and squeals, as if some incident had excited their mirth and ridicule. Whether this social hilarity and boisterousness is in celebration of the pairing or mating ceremony, or whether it is only a sort of annual housewarming common among high-holes on resuming their summer quarters, is a question upon which I reserve my judgment. Unlike most of his kinsmen, the golden wing prefers the fields and the borders of the forest to the deeper seclusion of the woods, and hence, contrary to the habit of his tribe, obtains most of his subsistence from the ground, probing it for ants and crickets. He is not quite satisfied with being a woodpecker. He courts the society of the robin and the finches, abandons the trees for the meadow, and feeds eagerly upon berries and grain. What may be the final upshot of this course of living is a question worthy the attention of Darwin. Will his taking to the ground and his pedestrian feats result in lengthening his legs, his feeding upon berries and grain subdue his tints and soften his voice, and his associating with robin put a song into his heart? Indeed, what would be more interesting than the history of our birds for the last 2 or 3 centuries? There can be no doubt that the presence of man has exerted a very marked and friendly influence upon them, since they so multiply in his society. The birds of California, it is said, were mostly silent till after its settlement, and I doubt if the Indians heard the wood thrush as we hear him. Where did the bobolink disport himself before there were meadows in the north and rice fields in the south? Was he the same lithe, merry-hearted beau then as now? And the sparrow, the lark, and the goldfinch, birds that seem so indigenous to the open fields and so averse to the woods, we cannot conceive of their existence in the vast wilderness without man. But to return, the song sparrow, that universal favorite and firstling of the spring, comes before April, and its simple strain gladdens all hearts. May is the month of the swallows and the orioles. There are many other distinguished arrivals. Indeed, 9/10 of the birds are here by the last week in May, yet the swallows and orioles are the most conspicuous. The bright plumage of the latter seems really like an arrival from the tropics. I see them dash through the blossoming trees, and all the forenoon hear their incessant warbling and wooing. The swallows dive and chatter about the barn, or squeak and build beneath the eaves. The partridge drums in the field sprouting woods. In the fresh sprouting woods, the long tender note of the meadowlark comes up from the meadow, and the sunset from every marsh and pond come from the 10,000 voices of the hylas. May is the transition month, and exists to connect April and June, the root with the flower. With June the cup is full, our hearts are satisfied, there is no more to be desired. The perfection of the season, among other things, has brought the perfection of the song and plumage of the birds. The master artists are all here, and the expectations excited by the robin and the song sparrow are fully justified. The thrushes have all come, and I sit down upon the first rock with hands full of the pink azalea to listen. With me the cuckoo does not arrive till June, and often the goldfinch, the kingbird, the scarlet tanager delayed their coming till then. In the meadows the bobolink is in all his glory, in the high pastures the field sparrow sings his breezy vesper hymn, and the woods are unfolding to the music of the thrushes. The cuckoo is one of the most solitary birds of our forests, and is strangely tame and quiet, appearing equally untouched by joy or grief, fear or anger. Something remote seems overweighing upon his mind. His note or call is as if one lost or wandering, and to the farmer is prophetic of rain. Amid the general joy and the sweet assurance of things, I love to listen to the strange, clairvoyant call. Heard a quarter-mile away, from out the depths of the forest, there is something peculiarly weird and monkish about it. Wordsworth's lines upon the European species apply equally well to ours. O blithe newcomer, I have heard. I hear thee and rejoice. O cuckoo, shall I call thee bird, or but a wandering voice? While I am laying on the grass, thy loud note smites my ear. From hill to hill it seems to pass, and once far off and near. Thrice welcome, darling of the spring, even yet thou art to me no bird but an invisible thing, a voice, a mystery.